Welcome to a hometown television special on man and woman's and family's best friend, the dog. I'm Fred Honold, host, and we are most fortunate here, along with Teddy, to have our author and speaker and global traveler, Kim Kavin. Kim, welcome.
Thanks, Fred.
Great to have you here.
You too.
Good.
Freddie says hi, or Teddy says hi as
Hey,
well.
Ted, I like that. Ted and Fred. Maybe we'll have a future show here. I was amazed when you talked a few weeks ago. I was in the audience when I heard you talk, and I thought, people in the hometown family, we get out to about 32 towns, over 600,000 people have to hear your story. We get to the rest of the world through our video on demand and YouTube and whatnot. But your story is a compelling one and a fascinating one. In terms of dogs, 2 books?
2 books.
Yeah, that you've written?
Exciting, right?
Yeah, it is exciting.
Kind of amazing, yeah.
So start with how you got involved with dogs, because before that, you were traveling the world, flying hither and yon, and spending time on yachts. But we'll talk about that a little bit later.
That's true. I am a journalist. I was a daily newspaper editor for about 7.5 years. And then I became the executive editor of a magazine called Yachting, which I highly recommend taking that job if you ever get the opportunity. You do get to go around the world and see amazing places on fantastic yachts. And what happened was my dog died, like a lot of people. I had a wonderful dog. He was a Beagle mix. His name was Floyd, and he was almost 16 years old. And he died, and I wanted to get another dog. So I went on a website called petfinder.com, which had about 5 million unique users a month. This was not an unusual thing for people to do.
Now, what year is this approximately?
This was 6 years ago, so 2000. I apologize, no, 2010.
2010, right?
And I typed in my zip code thinking that'll be a local adoption. I'm helping a local nonprofit. I'm giving a dog a home. Let's do that. And long story short, it turned out that Blue, the dog that I ended up adopting through that site, he actually had come from North Carolina. And when he arrived, he had some really funky looking scabs all over his head and down the top of his back. And he'd been advertised as healthy with all of his vet papers, no problems. But when I took him to my vet in Mendham, she had a nervous breakdown and said, "What is this? You can't be trafficking sick dogs across state lines. What's going on here?" So I stood in the vet's office in Mendham, dialing every telephone number that had come on his papers. And the first telephone number I dialed, it turned out to be a feed store down in North Carolina. And they said, "You don't want us, you want the lady who neuters dogs in the back of the van once a week."
Wow.
And I said, "What?" And so I called that place, and it turned out to be a very good mobile spay-neuter clinic is what it was. But she said, "Yeah, you don't want us, you want the head of the local animal protection society. That's who brought him in. You need to talk to her." I said, "Okay." And I called her, and I said, "What is this rash? My vet won't let me leave the vet's office unless we determine what happened to this dog." And she said, "Well, we thought he had ringworm, so we treated him with bleach." And I made this gasping sound, like, "You did what to the dog? You bleached the dog?" And she said, "Well, if you don't like it, we could take him back and throw him in the gas chamber." And I said, "What is going on here?
Oh my God.
What have I done? And what have I gotten myself into?" And I ended up writing my first dog book, Little Boy Blue. I traced Blue's story all the way back and met all those people, and
all the people you talked to on the phone.
and then some. Everybody who had ever been involved, who had touched this dog, who had, right down to the woman who physically pulled him out of that shelter, which it turned out had a 95% kill rate and a gas chamber unless local rescuers stepped in to help. This was a taxpayer-funded shelter that had a $500,000 addition had just been put on, and they were very efficiently killing all the dogs, including ones like my Blue, who was 4 months old, 5 months old, something like that, super friendly, super sweet. He was doomed. And I ended up writing Little Boy Blue. And Blue and I would go to book signings, and he would hang out, not so much like Teddy here. Blue was never this calm, I have to say, in his whole life. But people would look at the book and tell me, I can't read stories like this because they're too sad, and the dog always dies at the end. And I'd say, "This is Blue. He's sitting right here. It's a happy ending. He makes it all the way to the end, and he has a great life." And they could not get past it. They couldn't get past it, and I realized how our media about dogs has people believing that we can't talk about the issues that are affecting them without their hearts breaking. So I sat back for about a year after that and thought, how do you write about this in a way that people will listen, that people can talk?
So this is now the 2011?
Now I'm around
2000?
2012, 2013.
Okay.
And I started going around to conferences, talking to breeders, talking to rescuers, trying to figure out an angle. How do you do this? No one had ever done it. I couldn't figure it out. And after about a year, I found myself at a conference in Washington, D.C. And I sat down at the breakfast table. I didn't know anybody. I'm just sitting there wearing my badge. And two women sat down across from me, and they were wearing badges that said they were rescuers from the Midwest. And I thought, okay, nice to meet you. And they started talking about how they had just come back from spending thousands of dollars at the dog auctions. And I said, at the what? Kind of the same reaction I'd had in the vet's office when I'd first heard gas chamber.
And this is the natural journalist coming out of you,
Yeah,
right?
and
Asking
so
questions, probing, trying to find out
what the heck is
the
that now?
story.
How is that a thing now? Dog auctions. And so I got on an airplane. I didn't have a book deal. I didn't have any reason for going other than I smelled a story. And I went and spent a day at America's biggest legal dog auction. And I watched about 300 dogs get auctioned to the highest bidder. A lot of people in that room, the dogs being sold came from breeders, mostly commercial scale breeders, what some people would call puppy mills, what others would call commercial scale farms. There were also rescuers in that room spending money, buying the dogs direct from the auctioneer with the money going to the breeder. Then they would take them out to places like the East Coast where we are and say they'd been rescued from puppy mills and people would pay to adopt them.
Even though they hadn't been rescued.
They'd been purchased and kept the breeder in business. And I thought, well, there it is right there. This is about money.
Right.
Let's try to tell this story about money. And I wrote the book, The Dog Merchants, which is half about breeding, half about rescue, and all about the fact that we have turned man's best friend into man's biggest commodity, and now we have to start dealing with the ethical implications of that. So that
Very
book
much
just
so.
came out this past May, and it's affected legislation in 2 states. It's been featured everywhere from the New York Post to the New Republic magazine. It's gone a little gangbusters and not exactly what we expected.
And that's fantastic. You've been on CNN. You also have developed, and I want to get deeper into your story here in a moment, but you also developed a website people should be aware about that for dogs and dog breeding and dog rescuing does on the net what restaurant net recommendations like a Yelp or an Open Table does for restaurants.
Yeah, when I was reporting The Dog Merchants, I put myself into a frame of mind where I was going to think about dogs as a business. I love my dogs. My dogs sleep in my bed. They get Christmas presents under the tree. They are members of my family. But for the purposes of this book, they are a product for sale in the United States to the tune of 8 million pet dogs a year. And when I started thinking that way and started realizing what a business this is, marketing these dogs, moving these dogs into homes, I realized that as a consumer, I have no way to know who to trust. How do I know if that breeder is being honest and what happens when the dog comes home? How do I know if that rescuer is telling the truth when they say the dog is healthy and friendly? And I thought every other product you can buy in the world, there's a place you can go and look at ratings and reviews, whether it's a hotel room or a restaurant or my books. You can go on Amazon and see what people have rated them. So I took my whole first advance check from the Dog Merchants book and I built dogmerchants.com as a place where people can post these ratings and reviews. And it's been live for a few months now. We're getting more and more every day. It's going to take a while, I'm sure, to catch on, but hopefully it'll make a little difference and help lift up the honorable breeders and rescuers and expose the ones who are not being honest and treating the dogs badly.
So I'm sure you're getting a lot of applause and a lot of angry shouts.
It's an interesting world, the dog world. People are very passionate, let's say, that I get.
That's a nice way to put it.
I'm sure that we will win some awards. And I can't even describe to you what people say about me on the internet sometimes because it's not appropriate for this television show.
So you're part hero, part villain, mostly hero.
The way that I look at it is no one has been able to point out a single thing that's inaccurate. They just get mad that certain things are getting exposed. And that tells me I've done my job, that I've hit a bullseye on the truth. And, to try to shut me up at that point, never going to happen.
Not going to happen now.
Yeah.
So you're at this puppy mill, the biggest auction. Where is it located?
This is not a puppy mill or a breeder of any kind.
This is an auction?
This is an auction house, just as if you'd go to Christie's in New York and they'd have an auction of paintings or an auction of antiques. This goes on all the time in the biggest legal, How are you? The biggest legal dog auction in America is in Wheaton, Missouri.
Okay.
And it's held in a barn. And this is not what people from out here would expect. You would think it's dark and scary and everything's very sad. That's not what's going on there. It's light, it's bright, there's bleachers, there's a sound system, there's concessions, people bring their kids, they're eating nachos, buying snacks and sodas. This is like going to a day at the fair.
It's an event.
It's rural America. And the way the auction got started, I went back and spent a second day with its owner, a full day with the man who owns the dog auction, who at one point looked at me and said, "Get in my pickup truck, I want to show you a few things." And I got in the truck. You can't tell my mother that I did that.
Won't tell Mom.
Yeah,
Right.
But he got into the business because his family was one of the first big breeders in America. They were around the 1950s when everybody was moving to suburbia and wanted to get a house with a dog and a picket fence, and they figured it out and changed over their dairy farm to a puppy breeding farm.
They could see the trend.
They could see it coming, and this man grew up in that household and started to figure out, well, we need a place where breeders can come to swap their breeding stock. Let's say one has too many golden retrievers and they need more dachshunds, or one breeder has too many Labradors and needs more poodles, whatever it might be.
So it's an exchange for trading.
That was what it started out as, but
Right.
now it has become something very, very different, because rescuers have decided that purchasing dogs through this auction is the equivalent of saving them. They believe that if they can win the bid on the dog, they are saving the dog from going back into a breeding kennel that many of them would call a puppy mill, even though the kennel might be licensed and legal and have no violations. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So now it's just become this enormous funding, finance. It's insane. Hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes change hands in this auction house in a day, in a barn.
That's extraordinary.
For dogs, and it's fascinating. And that's just chapter 1 of the Dog Merchant's book, because when you start looking at dogs as a product and going to places like this, you really start to understand the industry in a new way. And what are we all buying into with every dog that we bring home?
Which will lead us into the shows and everything else. Take us and our viewers a little more into this barn. What is the size of it? How often did the auctions happen?
Boy, what would I compare it to?
Is it like a gymnasium, a
I was going
basketball
to say
gymnasium?
maybe not quite as big as a basketball gymnasium, but you're getting there.
Right.
It's not small, and
So you have hundreds of people at a time, easily.
yeah, and at one point it was standing room only during the auction that I attended, and as the day goes on, people are coming sometimes for certain dogs, so once they get done bidding on what they've come to bid on, they leave, so it kind of thins out. And what I write about is at the end of the day, it looks like any state fair. There's cups and plates and half-eaten food on the ground, people just dumping their stuff, they miss the trash can, and everybody's packing up what they won the bids on. They're throwing them into their trucks and taking them wherever they choose to take those dogs.
And are the dogs brought out during the auction, just like they would for horses when they auction them?
Yep, there's a folding table down in the front, and there's a handler for each dog who holds the dog, just like I'm holding Teddy here right now.
Okay.
And the vast majority of the dogs, at least the day that I was there, seemed completely unfazed. They seemed maybe a little bewildered, maybe a little confused, but not nervous, not scared. I saw one or two that I wrote about in the book that were clearly terrified. But out of 300 some odd dogs, one or two being scared, most of them, some of them were puppies. That you'll literally get a table full of, say, Labrador puppies. There's 5 puppies that come out in the same litter, and breeders will win the bids on 2 of them, and rescuers will win the bids on 3 of them. And 2 of those dogs will be marketed to the public as purebred Labrador, $1,500 per puppy.
Incredible.
And the other 3 from the same litter will be marketed as rescued from a puppy mill, pay us $300 for the puppy.
So take us into the business in the back office, if you will. What price ranges are these dogs auctioned off at? And then again, if I buy the dog through a rescuer versus a breeder, what's the retail?
Fascinating, and it's changing because so many rescuers are now starting to do this. They're skewing the market inside the auctions. I saw everything from a dog that nobody would bid $1 on the dog, not a single dollar, to I think the highest price I saw that day was a little over $1,400. The most expensive dog he says he ever sold was $12,600, which sounds like a lot of money until you realize if that's a popular breed of dog, you have a couple litters of puppies, you've more than paid for that dog.
Certainly.
As a breeder.
Interesting on that point then. The dog then is bred, and that's where, in a way, the real money is made on those dogs.
We did the math out on West Highland White Terriers. I grew up with, they were some of the dogs we had as kids. I had Corky and Brandy, the little Westies, growing up.
Okay.
And we did the math out where if you had paid $650 for a female Westie at this auction when she was young and just starting to breed, you could, over the life of that dog, generate probably somewhere in the vicinity of $65,000 between what the breeder earns on the puppies, what the brokers and the middlemen earn, and what the pet store or the final retail person is selling the dogs for. That single dog can produce that much revenue for that many people if they wanted to.
That's an extraordinary return on investment, isn't it?
It is, and the prices at the auction on the popular dogs are only going up because the rescuers will come in and try to outbid the breeders because they want to, in their minds, save these dogs. So you end up with bidding wars for some of these dogs, to the point that the owner of another dog auction that doesn't exist anymore in America told me it was the greatest thing that ever happened for the breeders when the rescuers started showing up, because dogs that the breeders could sell for $100 or $200 at the auction, well, now they were going for $800. They actually started breeding more dogs to sell to the rescuers they knew that were going to come. And the breeders were laughing all the way to the bank. But the rescuers kept sending the money, and people kept giving donations because they felt that they were saving the dogs from the system.
So you've got this, because of the increasing demand, people are fueling the supply. And then you get these annual shows that got on, that the Westminster, for example.
Yes. This is one of the things I get the hate mail from the breeding side on, is my opinion on televised dog shows. I have no problem with people who want to hold a dog show and breeders who want to go and meet other breeders and see which dogs are the best and the healthiest and have the best temperaments and breed those dogs. I have no problem with that whatsoever. My problem is when you put it on television, it's no longer about that. It's about mass marketing. And what happened with shows like Westminster was, you have to think back. Westminster first aired 3 years before I Love Lucy. TV was a little different in those days. You know, you had to get up off the couch to change the channel. There was, if you saw a dog on TV that you thought was interesting, you had to go to the telephone attached to your wall and dial on the rotary dial and try to find a breeder and go meet the breeder and get the, very, very different from today, where we put these shows on television today and they go into millions and millions and millions and millions of homes. And people are doing what on their sofa while they're watching? They're sitting there with their smartphone. And they go, oh, that's a cool looking dog. I'd like one of those. And they go on Google and they can dial up on their phone some kind of a breeder who will just ship them a dog like they'd ship them a toaster. And these shows, when I go out to places like the dog auction and talk to the farmers, who some people would call puppy mills, they say these televised dog shows are some of the best marketing assets that they have. We have turned these shows into the biggest marketing assets for all of the worst offenders. And the business model is only expanding. We're coming into dog show season now. We're going to have the AKC National Championship on TV around Christmas time. Then we'll have Westminster on TV around Valentine's Day. And they've just announced that starting in this Easter, we'll now also have the Beverly Hills Kennel Club dog show on TV. So you're going to have people watching this and thinking, oh, this is only the best of the best of the best dogs. But the people who actually fill the supply that these dog shows generate the demand for, that's not the breeders that you're seeing on TV. That's the breeders who are hanging out at the auction house.
That's a sort of a fascinating time frame, isn't it? From the holidays, Christmas time into Easter, more winter, more indoors. Is there a certain reason why that's chosen during the course of the year? Do they think they'll capture more people?
Well, the holidays have traditionally been a time when people want to bring home a dog, right?
There you go.
You want to get a puppy. And rescuers have mixed feelings on whether they should adopt out at the holidays. Some of them say, we don't want any part of that. That's just people making an impulse purchase. We don't want to give our dogs to those kinds of people. Other rescuers say, look, they're going to buy a dog anyway. Let's try to get one of the dogs out of the shelters instead of one of the dogs from breeders who will stick them in a crate and ship them anywhere for a flat fee. It's controversial.
Now, when you go back, you were sharing when I heard you talk initially, this individual was initially very reluctant to meet with you.
The owner of the dog auction?
The owner, yes.
Actually, I was nervous that he would be reluctant. You know, I went to the auction for a day and I watched, and I thought, there is no way this guy's going to talk to the media. He was very clear he wanted no cameras, that if anybody held up their iPhone, he was coming to see what they were recording. And, you know, so I went home and I spent about a week writing and rewriting an email to this man and just trying to figure out how to say to him, I just want to understand how this came to be and what this is. And I finally sent the email, and you know, you press send and you sit back and you're like, oh, what have I done? What's going to happen? And within probably 10, 15 minutes, I got a reply.
Wow.
And he said, thank goodness someone's actually asking me questions instead of just, you know, calling me the devil. Can you be here in a few days? I turned around, got back on a plane, and went back to Missouri.
So he was impressed by the fact that you were fact-based, that you wanted to find out the story, and he felt the real story wasn't getting out.
A lot of the people I meet in the Midwest feel like they are not being heard. And I think that given what just happened in our recent presidential election, we should all listen to them when they say that, because they have sent us a very clear message that they are not being heard. I actually have an article that ran in today's Washington Post about this very thing, where everyone I go out to meet in the Midwest says we are sick of people from blue states coming out here and telling us how to live our lives and what we have to do. And they're going to protest us if we don't change. And you want to be a vegan and, you know, have a shelter puppy, you know, do your thing. We're not going to bother you. Why do you keep coming out here and talking to us this way? So a lot of what's going on in our national conversation is going on with these people that I go meet in the Midwest. And they're not bad people. They're just from a farming background, and they have very different opinions about a lot of things. And they do feel like their voices are not being heard. So I do my best to just listen to them and understand their story. And that to me is how you tell the truth. That's why the Dog Merchant's book is doing so well, I think, because it's voices that we never ever hear. And they're not necessarily crazy, evil people. We may disagree about how they're treating their dogs, and a lot of times I do, but there's reasons that this is going on. This didn't happen overnight. They wouldn't be producing this many dogs if we weren't buying them. We invented this. We're just now coming around to the fact that we have to take some ethical responsibility for it as consumers.
That's an excellent perspective. What is that old expression? If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And here people are looking one direction without taking accountability. When I heard you talk, Kim, you had that interesting balance about the cultural divide that we've seen so much through the most recent election. But the people in the Midwest, the farmers, are used to raising livestock. And so just like they'd raise cattle, they raise dogs. That's how they think about it. And yet on the East Coast here, there's a whole different mentality about the dog and the way we handle dogs. And rather than being outside, we bring them inside and into bed with us.
Yeah.
Share with us sort of the different perspectives that you found just from living here on the East Coast, an original Jersey girl, living in Morris County now, and traveling through the Midwest.
You know, like I said, my dogs sleep in my bed, and
Right.
and I mean like under the covers when it's cold. They're down there just relaxing and being warm under the blankets. And when I go talk to somebody like an Amish puppy farmer, he thinks I'm crazy. He thinks I'm insane. He was raised in farming where you are taught, you raise the animal, you take enough good care of the animal that the animal stays healthy. You get whatever you're supposed to get out of the animal, whether that's baby animals or animal burgers or whatever it is you're doing there. And then you go in your house with your children and your family, and that's the way life goes.
Right.
It doesn't make you evil. It makes you a farmer. And so some of these guys, they have really modern kennels where I go to these commercial breeding farms. I would be fine with my dogs staying there for a week. And some of these people have runs the size of our local baseball fields, our local softball fields, and the dogs are running around and playing and having a great time. And they have shelter when they get cold. And when I go up to them, they let me pet them. They seem friendly with people. The only difference is they're not living in a house, but they seem happy and friendly and healthy. And these folks are getting inspected and regulated. And I really have no problem with that. we are, after all, talking about animals. And it might be a little crazy that Teddy here isn't wearing a nicer shirt than I am. You know, we have to think about that. But what they are realizing is that we are the target market. We are the people they want to buy the puppies. And if they don't start making sure that all the breeders are treating the dogs the way we would like to see them treated, you know, we don't want to see dogs in conditions that we might think of when we hear the term puppy mill. We don't want to see them living in a little cage their whole life on wire flooring, and they never see daylight in their entire life. Most of us are not okay with that, even if it is legal under current regulations. So they're picking up on this and saying, all right, well, we're willing to change, but now we have a financial issue because you guys still want to go on your smartphones and pay $300 for a puppy. How do you expect me to make a $50,000 investment in my kennel with those economics? How do I do that as a breeder? And how do we do that when we can't even have a rational conversation with each other? How are you going to have that discussion about we might need some grant money if we want to see these kennels improved? We might need to start looking at this issue differently than protesting and whatnot. And it's going to take years, I think, to sort itself out. It took decades to get where we are today, and we're just now starting to realize what we've done.
We do have so much to talk about. Fortunately, we've got 2 half-hour segments for this. So in our second half, we'll be talking more about things that you brought to light. But what really intrigues me is you've looked at, if you will, the sell side of the equation and the buy side. You've looked at what a lot of people don't know about in terms of the business behind the business, and then the side that we're familiar with of dogs in the neighborhood, dogs in the homes and whatnot. And due to a lot of your work, what you've uncovered and discovered along the way is there really hasn't been uniform regulation throughout the country. So we'll talk more about that in the second half. But these are the things you're beginning to do that's starting to change the nature of the industry. Yeah,
like here in New Jersey, we have legislation that's pending right now. They're calling it a pet store puppy mill ban. This is one of about 180 municipalities have enacted these so far across America. We are one of the states where they're trying to push through the first statewide version. And what these bills, what it said originally here in New Jersey was if you own a pet store in the state of New Jersey, you can no longer buy a dog from any breeder of any kind. You now have to only exclusively get your dogs from shelters and rescue groups. And the pet stores went crazy. The notion of the law was if we're going to have some breeders who are treating dogs badly, we don't want those dogs being sold here. But the pet stores said, hang on a minute, the breeders are actually regulated and the rescuers aren't. How can we trust that the dogs coming from the rescuers are going to be healthy and friendly? And you can't. There is no way to tell. So that big fight is going on right now. And if that law is enacted, I am proud to say that because of me and my big mouth and my new book, rescuers in New Jersey will have to have a license for the first time ever in the state of New Jersey, which I think is a good thing. You need something to revoke if people are treating dogs poorly. And rescues become a big enough business that we need to start monitoring it, is my opinion on that.
Well, we have more to talk about. You have Teddy as relaxed as can be. To our viewers, please tune in for the second segment where Kim and I, with Teddy, will continue the conversation. Thank you.